The vast conference hall hummed with tension. Delegates from across the galaxy clustered together, their various forms shifting nervously. Captain J. Park stood alone, her military uniform crisp against the shimmering holographic displays that dominated the room. Outside the transparent dome, stars glimmered coldly. Something was coming, something terrible. The void swarm had been consuming entire star systems like a hungry predator. Planets turned to dust, civilizations vanished, and, now, it was approaching the central systems of the Galactic Confederation. Delegates from a dozen species whispered in fear. The methane-breathing Valkorians trembled, their translucent bodies flickering with anxiety. Crystalline representatives from the mineral kingdoms clicked and vibrated, their communication a mix of fear and desperation. "We must evacuate," mumbled the Trinar ambassador, a blob-like creature with multiple sensory tendrils. "Our survival depends on retreat." J. Park listened silently. Her dark eyes scanned the holographic data, tracking the void swarm's progression. Most species saw only destruction. She saw something different. The human delegation was small but focused. While others panicked, they analyzed. While others ran, they prepared. Siak Lee, the mission's chief strategist, approached Jay. His tablet displayed complex mathematical models and potential intervention strategies. "The swarm moves in predictable patterns," he whispered. "They have weaknesses." Most delegates ignored the humans. Humanity was new to galactic politics. Their technology was considered primitive, their methods unpredictable. But something burned in their eyes that other species couldn't comprehend. Determination. The holographic display shifted, showing the void swarm's current trajectory. It would consume approximately 17 inhabited systems within the next solar cycle. Billions would die. Entire civilizations would be erased from existence. "Recommendation?" asked the Confederation's primary coordinator, a multi-limbed entity from the Proxima system. Silence filled the room. The alien delegates looked at each other. Their responses were unanimous: complete retreat, abandon their colonies, save whatever population they could. But J. Park stepped forward. "We can stop them," she said simply. Laughter erupted. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that comes from complete disbelief. "Humans? Stop the void swarm? Impossible." Siak Lee began, displaying preliminary calculations. Complex graphs showed potential intervention points. Mathematical models demonstrated unexpected vulnerabilities in the swarm's movement patterns. The room slowly grew quiet. Jay understood something fundamental that other species had forgotten. Survival wasn't about running. It was about standing ground, about fighting when everything seemed hopeless. Her small team of human experts continued their presentation. Each slide, each calculation challenged the conventional wisdom. Where other species saw certain destruction, humans saw opportunity. The Confederation's leaders exchanged glances. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were different. Humans were dangerous. As the presentation concluded, an uncomfortable silence descended. The void swarm was coming, and somehow, impossibly, the humans seemed prepared to do what no other species would dare: fight back. Captain J. Park's eyes reflected the holographic display. Cold, determined, unafraid. The first step towards humanity's defining moment had begun. Outside, between distant stars, something massive and terrible approached. And waiting to meet it was a species that would change everything. Humans. The preparation was unlike anything the Galactic Confederation had ever seen. While other species continued their panicked discussions, the human team worked with a precision that bordered on obsession. Lieutenant Dong Kim stood before a massive holographic display, his fingers dancing across complex projection maps. Around him, a small team of human specialists worked without sleep, their determination burning brighter than the emergency lights. "We need a direct approach," Dong explained to his team. Screens filled with intricate calculations, weapon designs, and movement patterns of the void swarm. The military research facility was a buzz of controlled chaos. Engineers developed new weapon systems in hours that would typically take years. Computer systems worked overtime, running millions of simulations per second. Most alien observers laughed. The Alphard diplomat, a creature whose body resembled a complex network of crystal tubes, found the human preparation particularly amusing. "Your species has no chance," the diplomat had declared during an earlier briefing. "The void swarm consumes entire civilizations. What can a single human fleet do?" But humans had something other species didn't understand: hope, determination, an impossible belief that they could change the outcome. Prototype weapons took shape. Quantum disruptors that could theoretically interrupt the void swarm's molecular structure, gravitational manipulation devices that could redirect massive energy signatures. Each design pushed the boundaries of current scientific understanding. Hyun Cho, the mission's lead tactical analyst, worked on something revolutionary: a comprehensive battle strategy that went against every known military doctrine in the galaxy. Where others saw certain death, he saw opportunity. The human fleet began to assemble, ships that looked different from anything in the Galactic Confederation. Sleek, purposeful, each vessel modified with experimental technology that made alien engineers scratch their heads in confusion. "They're preparing suicide missions," whispered the Trinar delegates. But their whispers carried a hint of something else: curiosity, respect. Dong Kim reviewed the final mission parameters. The plan was insane, impossible. A direct assault against an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations. No strategic retreat, no backup plan, just pure human determination. Training intensified. Pilots ran impossible simulation scenarios. Each human understood the mission's stakes. Failure meant not just their destruction, but the potential end of multiple civilizations. Communication channels between human teams hummed with a unique energy. No fear, no doubt. Only a shared understanding that they would succeed. The Alphard diplomat continued to mock. "Humans are children playing with weapons they cannot understand," he would say. But fewer and fewer species listened to his warnings. Something was happening, something unprecedented. As the final preparations completed, a strange silence fell over the human preparation zones. Pilots checked their equipment. Engineers made last-minute adjustments. A sense of calm determination replaced typical pre-mission anxiety. They weren't just preparing for a mission, they were writing a new chapter in galactic history. Dong Kim looked at the final mission clock. Hours remained before they would launch into the unknown, against an enemy that had never been defeated, an enemy that consumed entire star systems, like a child might eat candy. The human fleet stood ready, not with fear, not with panic, but with a certainty that would soon change everything. The impossible mission was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The first moments of engagement were silent. Absolutely silent. Hyun Cho watched the tactical screens as human ships emerged from hyperspace. Their formation was unlike anything military experts had ever seen. Tight, precise, almost mathematical in its perfection. The void swarm didn't expect them. Massive antimatter entities that had consumed entire civilizations suddenly found themselves facing something completely unexpected: humans. The first wave of attacks came not with massive weapons, but with calculated precision. Quantum disruptors, fired in sequences that seemed to dance between molecular structures. Where other species would blast with pure energy, humans' surgical struck specific points. Pilot Seok Min's fighter moved like liquid silver. His craft weaved through impossible trajectories targeting critical points in the void swarm's collective structure. Each movement was a calculated risk, each maneuver defying conventional understanding of space combat. "Target locked," his computer announced. But Seok didn't need computer guidance, his instincts were faster. One critical strike, then another, and another. The first reports came quickly. Alien communication channels buzzed with disbelief. The human fleet wasn't just fighting, They were systematically dismantling an enemy considered unbeatable. 40% of the Void Swarm's leading units disappeared in the first 15 minutes. Alien observers watched in stunned silence. Their advanced sensor systems couldn't comprehend what was happening. Humans were using tactics that broke every known rule of engagement. Gravitational manipulation devices created temporary spatial distortions. Quantum entanglement weapons confused the swarm's collective consciousness. Each human ship moved with an intelligence that seemed almost alive. "Impossible," muttered the Alfred diplomat, watching the live feeds. His crystal structures vibrated, with a mix of fear and growing respect. Seok Min's squadron continued their assault. They weren't just soldiers. They were artists of destruction. Where other species saw certain death, humans saw opportunity. The Void Swarm began to react, but it was too late. Humans had already anticipated every possible countermove. Communication between human pilots was minimal. A few coded messages, quick confirmations. They moved like a single organism, each pilot understanding their role perfectly. Massive antimatter entities that had consumed star systems suddenly found themselves being consumed, pushed back, defeated, not through brute force, but through intelligence, strategy, an understanding of physics and combat that went beyond traditional warfare. Hours passed. The battle continued, and with each passing moment the impossible became reality. Humans were winning. The Galactic Confederation watched, some in fear, some in growing admiration, but all understanding that something fundamental had changed. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the battle's first phase concluded, Hyun Cho allowed himself a small smile. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Not a single human vessel had been lost. The Void Swarm was about to learn a critical lesson: never underestimate humans. The intervention had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The communication channels of the Galactic Confederation erupted with confusion. Humans were doing the impossible. Where every other species had predicted total defeat, they were witnessing a complete transformation of warfare. Captain J. Park stood on the bridge, her eyes focused on the tactical displays. Each movement of the human fleet was calculated, precise, almost like a complex dance of destruction. Pilot Seok Min continued his extraordinary performance. His fighter moved through space like liquid mercury, striking critical points in the Void Swarm's collective structure. Other pilots followed his lead, their movements synchronized with mathematical precision. Alien observers watched in disbelief. The Trinar delegates huddled together, their sensory tendrils vibrating with a mix of fear and growing respect. The Mineral Kingdom representatives clicked their crystalline structures, trying to understand the human strategy. "They're not just fighting," whispered one Alfred diplomat. "They're rewriting the rules of combat." Each human pilot seemed to understand something fundamental that other species had forgotten. War wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about intelligence, adaptation, understanding your enemy better than they understood themselves. The Void Swarm began to fragment. Massive, antimatter entities that had consumed entire civilizations now found themselves being systematically dismantled, not through brute force but through precise, intelligent intervention. Hyun Cho's tactical calculations proved perfect. Every prediction, every potential countermove had been anticipated. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship understanding its role with remarkable clarity. Communication between human teams remained minimal, quick, efficient, no wasted words. Just pure, focused action. The battle entered its critical phase. Alien sensor systems struggled to track human movements. Their ships seemed to appear and disappear, striking with surgical precision before the Void Swarm could respond. Most fascinating was how humans approached the seemingly impossible. Where other species saw certain destruction, they saw opportunity. Each challenge was a problem to be solved, each threat a puzzle to be decoded. Seok Min's squadron continued their extraordinary assault. They weren't just soldiers. They were artists of warfare. Their movements defied traditional understanding of space combat. Hours passed. The Galactic Confederation watched, some in terror, some in growing admiration, but all understanding that something fundamental had changed. The Void Swarm's collective consciousness began to show signs of confusion. For the first time in its existence, it faced an enemy it couldn't predict, an enemy that didn't follow expected patterns, an enemy that was completely, utterly human. Captain J. Park allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Not a single human vessel had been lost. The experimental weapons and tactics were working perfectly. Alien diplomatic channels buzzed with growing respect. The initial mockery had transformed into something else. Curiosity, respect, a growing understanding that humans were different, humans were dangerous. As the battle's critical phase concluded, the Void Swarm found itself pushed back, defeated, dismantled by a species that everyone had underestimated. The perception of humanity was about to change forever. No longer would they be seen as a young, inexperienced species. They were now something else entirely. A force that could change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. The impossible had become possible, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The final confrontation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Captain J. Park's strategy unfolded with brutal efficiency. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship understanding its role perfectly. Where other species saw certain destruction, humans saw an opportunity to save everything. The Void Swarm, once considered an unstoppable force, began to crumble. Massive antimatter entities that had consumed entire civilizations now found themselves being systematically dismantled. Hyun Cho's calculations proved perfect. Every potential counter-move had been anticipated. The experimental weapons worked, beyond anyone's expectations. Quantum disruptors tore through the swarm's molecular structure. Gravitational manipulation devices created spatial distortions that confused the collective consciousness. Seok Min's fighter squadron continued their extraordinary assault. They weren't just soldiers, they were artists of warfare. Each movement was a calculated risk, each maneuver defying conventional understanding of space combat. The Galactic Confederation watched in stunned silence. Alien diplomatic channels erupted with a mix of disbelief and growing respect. The Alphard, delegates who had once mocked humanity, now watched with something close to awe. The Trinar representatives' sensory tendrils vibrated with a new understanding. Humans were different. Humans were extraordinary. As the battle reached its climax, something remarkable happened. The human fleet wasn't just fighting. They were saving multiple civilizations. Where other species had prepared for total evacuation, humans had prepared to fight. And they were winning. The Void Swarm's collective intelligence began to fracture. For the first time in its existence, it faced an enemy it couldn't predict. An enemy that didn't follow expected patterns. An enemy that was completely, utterly human. Not a single human vessel was lost during the entire campaign. The final moments of the battle were almost surgical. Precise strikes, calculated movements. The human fleet dismantled the Void Swarm with a level of intelligence that bordered on the miraculous. When the last antimatter entity dissolved, a strange silence fell across the galaxy. The Galactic Confederation's leadership had no choice. They gathered in an emergency session watching the recorded battle footage. Humans had done what no other species had even considered possible. They had saved everything. The Alphard representative, who had once mocked humanity, now stood before the council. His crystalline body seemed to tremble with a new emotion. Respect. Humanity, he declared, is anything but cowardly. Captain J. Park stood before the Galactic Confederation. No victory speech, no dramatic declaration. Just a simple report of the mission's success. Her calm demeanor spoke volumes more than any words could. Hyun Cho's tactical calculations were already being studied by every major species. Their approach to warfare had changed everything. No longer would battles be fought with brute force. Intelligence, strategy, adaptation. These were the new weapons of war. Seok Min and his fellow pilots became instant legends, not through boasting, but through their extraordinary performance. They had done the impossible. The human delegation remained humble. They didn't celebrate, they didn't demand recognition. They simply presented their findings, offered assistance to affected civilizations, and prepared for whatever challenge might come next. As the dust settled, one thing became absolutely clear. Humanity was no longer just another species in the Galactic Confederation. They were its most formidable members. The impossible mission was complete. Civilizations had been saved. The void swarm was no more, and the galaxy would never be the same again.